Welcome to TQ Talks, where taxes meet planning. Here's your host, Craig White.
Welcome back to another episode of TQ Talks. I'm your host, Craig White. This is the summertime, and so we got a bunch of people sending us information. We just finished, or are finishing, right, our second quarter tax planning. It's the last month. We're in June. Kids are getting out of school. There's a lot of things going on, summer vacations. Hopefully you guys get some rest. But we're going to go over some topics that we know are essential to tax planning for the summertime and moving into the third quarter while addressing what you guys are requesting. So today's episode, we're going to go over reasonable compensation. This is for our S-Corp owners. Usually that's what it really boils down to. LLCs, you can't really do that, single member. But again, I digress. Let's get into this episode. Reasonable compensation, something that we all get wrong, and no one gives you good guidelines, and the IRS stuff is not exactly the easiest. So thanks for joining me. Let's get into it. One of the things people try to understand when they make the decision, right, or we have that discussion and we end up saying, hey, you're at a point where it looks like you need to convert or you're already an S-Corp or be taxed as an S-Corporation, is that you have to put yourself on a reasonable compensation. And there's a lot of silly things that go along with that statement. And what I mean by silly is the IRS says that, reasonable compensation. Yet there's really nothing that defines what a reasonable compensation is. And so everybody's pretty much frustrated or just making up their own rules. A lot of people realize when we get into the discussion that compensation means W-2, it means salary, right? Because if you don't put yourself on salary, you're taking an owner's draw or distribution, whatever people like to classify that as. I hate going back and forth about that. But when that money comes over from your S corporation to your personal on a K-1, there's no self-employment tax on that. That's 15.3% savings on your money, which is fantastic, right? So if you could save that kind of money, then a lot of people are like, well, if I'm going to compensate myself, if I'm going to pay myself to be the owner of my business and I have to make it reasonable, well, I'm just going to make it like $1 because I would rather avoid Medicare, Social Security, and federal taxes, makes total sense, right? Because that's what's going to happen when you put yourself on salary. But that's one of the biggest mistakes people make. They're trying to either pay themselves as little as possible or they pay attention to other people. They say, oh, well, my whoever has never put themselves on salary, or, the lower I make it, the cheaper it is for me. And, yes, but also no, because you're also not paying yourself, putting yourself into of the position to where you'll be able to get Social Security or things like that later on. But that's not for this episode. Maybe we'll talk about it another time. What we're really trying to help you to understand in today's episode is what is a reasonable compensation for you and how does the IRS determine that? And also, how do I determine it? How do I understand what reasonable compensation means? Like we spoke about in the beginning, it's usually just for S-Corp owner/employees, right? That's what's going on. And what the IRS is trying to pay attention to is to say, hey, if someone were to come in and take over your role right now in the company, what would be a reasonable form of compensation that they would expect? If I was a first-year attorney and I'm running my company and I had a 15-year attorney or a 30-year attorney, would we be reasonably compensated the exact same amount? Chances are no, right? And that's any profession, right? Longevity usually means more, but that's not the only factor. You also have to compensate for what are your roles in the company? Like, what are you doing in there? Also, how are you? Are you actively in the part of the company? Are you passively part of the company? All those things affect you. And what you want to do is be able to pick or have a salary that's easy for you to defend. Right? That's the whole point. I'm going to pay myself something that's reasonable and that makes sense, and that if someone comes to replace me, yes, we're going to swap over and they're not going to cry about what they're getting paid and why. Because the why is also a very big component of all of this, right? So why does the IRS care about that? Because they say it. You have to do reasonable compensation. Well, they care because, again, they know everybody, if they figure out the rules, would just deal with distributions, and that's it. And they would win because the taxation is so much different, right, than a person who's actually putting themselves on salary. If they're giving you the ability in their eyes to say, hey, listen, pick your salary, put yourself on something that makes total sense, and just be reasonable about it, they don't expect you to abuse it. And they know that something you're stealing from them if you're doing no salary at all, because again, like we talked about, there's nothing going into the federal system. There's nothing going to federal taxes. There's nothing going to Medicare. There's nothing going to Social Security. So there's a problem there. And it is one of the auditable, right, offenses of S corporations. When you don't have a salary on there, they do not like that. It is something they really frown upon. And if you've gotten away with it, good for you. But I would suggest that you make an adjustment if possible. So moving on to probably the most important question. How do I know what my salary should be? Because this is great, Craig. Thanks for the information. All right, reasonable salary, wonderful. But I don't even understand how this works. Well, every business owner wants a simple answer to that. And unfortunately, I'm going to tell you it doesn't exist. There's no magic number. There's nothing. Everything is going to be different based on that business. Now, at the end of this part, more than likely, I'll tell you what we tell our owners that we talk to. But again, it's not a perfect rule. It is what it is, because it's going to be based on the profitability of the company, your responsibilities in the company, what industry you're in, what stage of growth, right? First year, 10th year, 100th year, how much time you spend in the business. All those things factor. So let's start with the first year offender. How about that? First-year offenders, we usually tell people, or first-year business owners, we tell people, hey, it's kind of hard for you to put yourself on any kind of salary because there's nothing to gauge it against. You can't gauge it against your neighbor who does the exact same thing, who made $38 million that first year, right? Because guess what? You're not them. And so ultimately, the first year, revenue's usually inconsistent. Your profitability is probably not there yet, and you're trying to figure things out. So the first year is a good year to just pay attention to how things go. Maybe there's no, if you have a salary at all, it's extremely low. But 9 out of 10, you're pretty much not putting yourself on anything at all. Second year, well, we have a actual tax return, and we see if there is profitability from the first year. If there is, now we have something to sort of gauge and figure out. So now you're paying attention to what happens in the second year. If the trend continues, let's say you made $50,000 net from year one, and then year two, you're at $70,000 net. I'm using these numbers just because it's easier. Then you could say to yourself, reasonably, I'm averaging $60,000 between those 2 years. Now it's time to figure out what you're doing. Now, if you're netting 50 or 60, we're just converting you, right? That's usually, if you listen to our previous podcast, usually if a single member LLC and you're making a netting 50, 60, 70, that's when we sort of have that discussion. Hey, maybe this is something to think about. But at that point, the reason is because we can put you on a reasonable salary. There's now you could say, okay, you know what? I'm netting this. Let me put myself on a $10,000, $15,000, whatever, $12,000 salary, $20,000, depending on what your projections are. But again, the first year, nothing. Second year, we are gauging where we are, and we're saying, hey, we have some kind of timeline. We see something going on, and we're now in our second year to see how the trend is moving. Now, by the third year, you should have a decent idea of what you're doing and what the company is or is not doing. If your profitability is up and you have some good margins and you're happy where things are, then we come and we tell you, hey, what we do is we say you should put yourself on, I don't know, a 20 to 30% range, 20 to 30% of your net. So if you're netting 100,000, you put yourself between 20 and 30K. And the reason why you're doing that on the W-2 side is because you still don't know what's going to happen the next year. Just because you made 100,000 net in, in 2026 doesn't mean it's going to happen in 2027. Now, again, I don't really want to delve into this in this episode, but there are reasons why you would want a larger salary, right, where it comes to loans, etc. There are reasons you'd also want, let me continue that. I'll give you another one. Investments, if you're doing solo 401s, SEPs, things like that, which again, we're not discussing the size of the W-2 does help when it comes to how much you can put in, at least for some of them. And don't get at me and say, well, Solo Craig, I know, I get it. But on some of them, it is based on the W-2 that you have, and they're able to give you a percentage of that for you to invest and be able to save for retirement. So sometimes you might want to increase that, even though it's scary, or you say, it's beneficial to you. And of course, we already know the reasons why you'd want to keep it down. So now that you have an idea of what a reasonable salary can be, again, like we talked about, just know that there's no magic number. The industry is something we want to touch on. Remember, just because we're making $250K a year and the person who runs a lawn service makes a $250,000 a year and the chiropractor makes $250,000 a year and a marketing agency makes $250 a year, it's not the same. The compensation does not have to be, and probably will not be, the same for all four categories, all four people. It won't be, because what is the role in that company? Am I just managing the guys that cut the lawn, right? Am I doing any of the work? Am I actively involved? If I'm running an advertising or marketing agency, what is my role in that company? Same thing for an accounting firm. So those factors will help to increase or decrease the amount of salary that you pay yourself. So the IRS isn't asking you what percentage you're using to figure that out. They're asking whether the compensation makes sense for the work that's being performed. Right? That makes sense to you guys? It's what work is being performed, and that's how you figure out what the compensation is. So again, factors that are going to affect your reasonable salary, things like your sales, or is it like the duties you're doing, right? Am I performing sales? Am I selling? Am I doing management? Am I running advertising and marketing in the business? Client mediation, client work. What's happening? Are there admin responsibilities? All these things are going to add up to what that person should or should not be paid for. Patrick doesn't do a ton of marketing advertising, but he sure does do IT work. So he takes that part, thinking about his compensation in the company the same way I would have to factor in what I'm doing as part of my reasons to get compensated. And is it reasonable for the work that I do? Are we full-time owners, part-time owners, active owners, passive owners? We had a whole slew of things we were trying to figure out, other business ideas, and trying to, always trying to ramp up or level up. And one of the replies from a business owner that came back and said, hey, if you guys are thinking about X, remember, you don't have to be a hands-on owner. Right? Because we were saying time. It's hard for us to do things based on the amount of time we have. And that was the response. So guess what? The role in the company that we would own would change. At least our duties would. So if we were to get another company and we are passively managing and owning that company, my compensation would be totally different than someone who's actively managing it, right? At least theoretically. Then you have to bring up experience. How many years are you in business? Your expertise level. Is it a specialized skill? Do you have specialized licensing or professional licensing? All those things are factored into it. So that's how it ends up being. And of course, the one that everybody talks about is your positions, industry standards, right? What does a similar position pay? Similar responsibilities pay, right? And where are you geographically? Because that also makes a whole bunch of difference between who's getting paid what and where. California is not going to be the same as Idaho, theoretically, right? So a reasonable salary for a consulting firm owner will likely look different from one than who owns a landscape company. It just will. It is what it is. It's because of what they're doing in the company and all the other factors that we mentioned, right? So guys, don't pay attention to a lot of social media myths. And it's hard because you don't know what to trust and what you can or cannot trust. And that's very difficult. Advice from friends can be scary. Sometimes we've heard things that just have a shiver and we're like, dear God, no, don't do that. And a lot of aggressive strategies, right? Because sometimes it's like, don't do this, do that. And they don't give a real reason. So just because someone else is getting away with something or doing things a certain way, and this is taxes, of course, because we're talking about, but in life, doesn't mean that you should be doing the same thing. Make sure that you're reviewing your salary. You're reviewing your compensation on a yearly basis, right? That's something you should be looking. How is that trending? And yes, you can adjust your salary. That's the other part we fail to understand. If I did $400,000 net last year and I'm trending towards $50,000 net the next year, guess whose salary is probably not going to stay the same? So adjust your salary. It's okay. Annual reviews, annually review your stuff, quarterly, whatever it is, to make sure that you're increasing or adjusting whatever it has to be in order for it to make sense to be reasonably paid. Right? You can't just look at your what you're saving and say, oh, okay, this is how I should designate or create my own salary, because that's just not going to be the best strategy. Is it sustainable? That's the other question, right? In a high and low number kind of thinking, because sometimes that's just not, again, something you would want to do all the time. So again, if you're looking at it and trying to figure out reasonable salary, yes, you should look at your industry. Yes, you should look at geography and where you are, your time frame, right? Your specialty, what your licenses are. There's a lot of factors to go in it, but ultimately the driving factor should not just be to save as much money as possible, because sometimes, like we talked about, again, especially with investments and savings, that could backfire for you. That's not the best decision to be made. So when you're looking over salary and doing your reviews and trying to figure out if something needs to be changed from year to year, just ask yourself, has my business grown significantly? It's easy. You're going to hopefully be looking at your tax return, right? That's part of what we're doing for the tax planning. Am I doing more work today than I did before? Things you have to figure out, right? Has my role changed in the company? My responsibilities changed in the company? Has the company become more profitable? Or less profitable, because it can go both ways, right? Make sure you're reviewing your salary as much as possible to keep yourself in the best situation that you can. As your business evolves, as your responsibilities evolve, as your profitability evolves, these are the things that you have to pay attention to. The growth mindset is not just in increasing the business and how it's making money. It's also in how you operate as a business owner. And a reasonable salary is something that you definitely have to pay attention to. So we'll leave you with this, right? The best reasonable salary isn't the lowest number you can justify, because I get it. That's what we all want to do. It's the number that reflects the value you're bringing to the business, and can that be supported if anyone ever asks you how you got there? If you're paying yourself 30, 40, 50, 100K, can someone justify, meaning you, that number based on all the things we talked about? If you can, then guess what? Kudos to you. You're in a great position. If you need help to figuring out your reasonable salary, or if you have any other questions, of course, feel free to give us a call, 800-413-1456. That's all we have today for TQ Talks. I think next time, I don't even know what we're doing, but I know we're in the summer. We're talking about money, so that's going to be what's rolling for this time. If you have not scheduled your second quarter tax planning, I don't know when this thing's coming out, please do so. We've got a lot of them in, but we are going to be venturing into third quarter coming July, and we want to make sure that we are ahead of the curve, man. You guys have an awesome evening, and thanks for joining us. Later.
Thank you for listening to TQ Talks. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at tqfinancials.com.